All right, all right, all right. Welcome back to the Misfit Nation. If you are a veteran and you are struggling for or feel like you're leading a path towards the darkness, stop and think about those who are around you. Think about how they truly value you, how they will miss you. You are not alone. You need to talk to someone. Someone will listen to you. If you feel like you'd be a burden to someone that's in your inner circle or your family, or embarrassed by what the problems you're having, call the anonymous hotline at 1-800-273-8255 and press option 1. Don't make a permanent solution to a temporary problem. If you're a new listener, thanks for joining us. Please subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast apps. This includes the Military Broadcast Radio app, and check out our family of shows there, also hosted by other veterans. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at _Misfit Nation. This will keep you up to date on our latest shows, episodes, and of course, bring you the stories of our guests. Speaking of which, our next guest is a speaker, former NFL coach, and podcast host who uses sports world as his backdrop to engage audiences with thought-provoking lessons on leadership, team building, and creating a championship culture. He is not your typical football coach. Despite not playing football beyond high school and no network in the coaching profession, his unlikely football journey began as a fourth grade coach, where he quickly worked his way to the NFL in just 6 years and included coaching for teams such as the Miami Dolphins, UCLA, and SMU. After spending 15 years working with the highest performing athletes, coaches, and teams on the planet, he now uses this unique football coaching background to teach people how to utilize the same strategies in business and life that elite players and teams use to perform at world-class levels. He also hosts his own weekly sports leadership podcast, The Highest Level, where he reveals how championship team cultures are built and the keys to leadership excellence at the highest level. So without further ado, let's welcome Evan Burk to the Misfit Nation. Welcome, Evan.
Rich, thank you so much for having me on the show tonight, and really excited to chat with you today.
It's awesome. That's a big leap to go from fourth grade football coach to the NFL. I mean, that's a leap by anyone's imagination right there. And also not playing past high school, like you said in your bio there. I mean, I'm sure you still had the itch to be with the game because you liked the game. You played in high school. You're probably around it your whole life. But how did that focus happen to get from fourth grade to NFL and to actually become a coach in the first place?
Yeah, and like you said, a lot of big leaps, but as we're all very aware, a lot of focus on our daily task and the small wins that amount to those large leaps. So like you said, I did not play in college. I went to the University of Colorado and was simply a student my freshman year there. And after a year, I just kind of felt like I was missing something. Like a lot of high school athletes, you're around competition, you're on a team, you're always kind of striving towards peak performance or personal greatness. And I miss some of that, not having a team anymore, so to speak, going to college and not really knowing what to do with that. I kind of had this idea that I wanted to still be involved in sports. And so that started as a youth sports coach. And so I was coaching at a local YMCA there in Boulder, Colorado, just youth, basketball, soccer, baseball. And then that eventually led me to coaching fourth grade football. And such was the kind of the humble beginnings of my path to the NFL.
That's outstanding. And giving back to your community by coaching the youth. I mean, as a young man at that time, I'm sure it was probably a lot of fun coaching the young kids in sports. I know I've had fun coaching the youth. I coached my daughter's first grade soccer team. That was like, I called it B-ball because all they did was run at the ball. No one really did any techniques, but they had fun. That's all. It was about at that level. And then as she got older, I learned a lot more about the game than I ever thought I would, not having played soccer in my whole life. So she taught me soccer, and vicariously through her, I learned it. And you learned coaching just by giving back to the community. That's outstanding.
Yeah. And you kind of had asked, I guess, in the first part of your question, how do you become a coach? And honestly, I didn't know. I didn't know what that looked like or what that would entail. I didn't have a family member or a dad that's in coaching or was an executive for an NFL team. And I didn't have a network because I wasn't a player past high school. And so I just did kind of the logical thing in my mind, which was I just had to start somewhere. And so, as you kind of mentioned too, I mean, maybe not learning a whole lot of football, coaching fourth grade football, but you're still kind of there in the true element, the true enjoyment of the game. So I feel very fortunate to have those experiences that kind of built the foundation for coaching at high school. And then once I graduated college, actually got to work in college and professional football.
I mean, you had two world-renowned schools there, UCLA and SMU. Been to both campuses; both are amazing. I believe that both those schools were good launching points for you to hit the NFL from either one of them. You could have probably jumped from either one into the NFL. What did you do? A position coaching, or were you some other kind of coach as well?
Yeah. So if the audience is not familiar with just the higher level of athletics, when we're talking college and pro, obviously these are entire teams that are built out. And a lot of times if you're a young coach and when I left college and started working at SMU, I was 22, 23 years old. So, didn't know a whole lot of anything, and they weren't going to charge me with, putting together the offensive game plan. So they kind of, they had me doing class checks, monitoring study hall, passing out Chick-fil-A's as guys got on the bus. And I thought it was the coolest job in the entire world, just to be around and honestly learning. Like, I wasn't just there kind of focused on my position in terms of, man, I wish I was doing more. I was very grateful for that opportunity to be in the room, learning from some very good coaches, and really just getting indoctrinated into what it takes to be a coach. And so really that first year was me understanding, okay, we get here at 6 a.m. every morning. We stay here till, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, whatever it takes. And then we move on to the next day. And, as a young, obviously coming from college, it was a little bit different than what I was used to, but it was a great learning ground for me, not only to understand the game of football better, but also just understand what it took to be successful as a coach. So you're 100% right. Like when you are, at places like SMU and UCLA, you're working with a lot of not only good coaches, but also some good players and a lot of players that are, even to this day, even though I was at SMU over a decade ago, guys that are still playing in the NFL: Cole Beasley, Emmanuel Sanders, Kelvin Beachum, Chris Banjo. I mean, there's a whole host of players that are still playing on NFL teams that I was coaching over a decade ago. So really cool to have those experiences and be at those great institutions. And like I was mentioning, like getting the chance to learn from really great people as well.
And when you're surrounded by greatness, you have no choice but to melt some of that into yourself and then be able to spread that outside of that circle. Like when you left coaching, left sports coaching, now you're doing executive coaching and speaking. You're able to use those same life experiences. How does that transition for you now as you get up on stage to pump up a room of executives or at a corporate headquarters? How's that a transition for you?
Yeah, I think early on, much like I was just describing with my football career, I had to kind of learn what were the stories that really resonated with audiences, what type of lessons that I want to impart on them. And that's one of the things I really enjoy, is kind of working with teams and kind of figuring out, okay, like what are their issues? Where have I seen this before? And I think what I saw was, as I started to grow as an executive coach and as a speaker, is that all of the problems that we faced at SMU and UCLA and the Miami Dolphins are all problems that basically every team faces, whether they're in a startup environment or whether it's a nonprofit or whether it's a big Fortune 500 company. Everybody's really dealing with the same problems. Now, there might be different dollar signs attached to some of these problems, but I really enjoy just kind of like sharing those stories. I'm very honest about kind of like what I do and what I don't do. I don't know the strategy of a telecommunications company and how they can kind of like increase by 10% in the Northwest region. That's obviously not my forte, but something that I do spend a lot of time talking about with my clients is, how do you turn around a losing culture? how do you get everybody in the room to start buying in to the vision of what you think your company can be? How do you get people that are already operating at a very high level to strive and desire to aim even higher? And as you were kind of alluding to a moment ago, put in that time and effort that it takes to be successful at those very high levels. And obviously something that I was very passionate, one of the main reasons I got into coaching. And then also one of the things I'm still passionate about today. And so a lot of people, when I run into them, will say, "Are you still coaching?" And I say, "Yes, I am still coaching, just not on the sidelines anymore."
Right. And just traded in cleats or sneakers for maybe some nice loafers or something like you can wear.
Yes, definitely a different wardrobe.
Yeah. And you get to, probably go home at a decent hour sometimes. So that helps out a lot.
Oh, that is, yes, that is, yes, without question. No more sleeping at the office.
Or sleeping standing up. So, and when you were on the field with those high performing athletes, and then you moved over to the corporate world, is there any common traits amongst the high performers on the sports field and those who are performing outstandingly in corporate America? Is there any common traits that they show you when you talk to them?
Yeah, great question. I think that there most definitely is a parallel. And I think, when we're talking about a peak performer, it doesn't have to be on the field. It doesn't have to be an Olympian. These are universal traits. To be successful at anything or to gain the type of experience needed to succeed at a very high level, you have to put in the time. And not only put in the time and the hard work, but there's also a factor of continuing to grow and continuing to improve. And this is something that you see across sports and across boundaries into the corporate environment, is the people that are doing it very well are continuing to improve and continually looking at themselves and within themselves to think about where they can improve, regardless of whether they're having a lot of success or regardless of whether they're in failure. And I think also just kind of like the resiliency to continue to persevere. I think that one of the big commonalities just between the business environment and sports and really life to a great extent is that you're all dealing and everybody is dealing with random events and setbacks, right? Like in football, we sit there at the beginning of the week and we say, okay, I think that when we go 3 wide and put 2 running backs in the backfield, that they're going to play this coverage to us. And like, these are the 3 blitzes that we're going to expect to see the most. And when we go 4 wide receivers, this is how they're going to adjust to that. This is what we think they're going to do. Here is the game plan. But so often you get into that game and they're doing maybe half, if that, of what you anticipated them doing. So then the contingency planning comes in and the adaptability and just the resilience you need to have to say, okay, well, they're not doing what we practiced all week. That's fine. Like, we're going to do us still. And we're going to keep coming at them. And so you see a lot of those parallels in just dealing with the random events of sports, just like we do in life and in business, and continually bouncing back from setbacks.
Having that resilient mindset helps out a lot. And as a high performer, you have to be resilient because you're going to get knocked down, especially in football. You're going to get knocked down. You're going to get hit by someone that's bigger than you, that's faster than you. When you think you're the top dog and all of a sudden someone hits you and you're on the ground, oh, he might be the top dog now. What do I do to get better? So you got to keep putting in that work. You mentioned putting in the work and over again. That's something that a lot of people need to hear. You got to put in that work. You have to put the effort forth in order to get the goal reach the goal you want to achieve. Your goal is not going to run behind you saying, here I am. You got to chase it. You got to work for it. And I think that's basically what you've seen firsthand with these young men on the football field, and of course, those young leaders in corporate America now.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that, in anything that we do, regardless of outside of business, like that's kind of what it takes to be successful in life. And, that's, as I was saying a moment ago, that's one of the things I really enjoy is kind of teaching through those stories and just kind of equating what I had gone through and the things that I had seen from the great leaders and great teams I was on to the same thing that relates to the audience.
Right. I mean, you were around great leaders and what made you decide to leave the field and then pivot into this new life of yours?
Yeah. So I went to the University of Colorado, as I mentioned earlier, and I always had this vision or this North Star that I was going towards, that I wanted to return to be the head coach at the University of Colorado. That was literally my North Star. That is everything I thought about. And when you have a strong North Star in your life or in your professional career, it doesn't make things easy, but it makes things very simple, because every decision kind of comes down to, okay, is this getting me closer to this ultimate goal, this ultimate vision? And throughout my entire career for 12 years, every time I faced any bit of adversity, just like anybody would in any career, I would always kind of fall back on that and just say, okay, you know what? Like this is paving a path for me. This is going to be a chapter in my book. And I had a moment my last year in coaching when I was at UCLA. We're probably 2 or 3 weeks from the end of the season. Rich, I was a meticulous note taker. So I took notes in every meeting I ever was in, because you never know when a coach is going to say something or something's going to happen that you take a note on that I'm going to be able to use when I'm eventually the head coach at the University of Colorado. So I was always front and center, pen out, ready to take notes in those meetings. And we had a meeting, early one morning, 8:00 in the morning. The whole team is filing into the meeting room. And I, for the first time in my career, had this like pull of like, I didn't want to go into that meeting room. And I kind of sat outside during that meeting and I was like, oh, this is kind of weird. I've never felt like this before. And like, as I was sitting there for that 45 minutes, hour long meeting, while, the whole team's in there doing the special teams meeting, whatever, it just kind of started to get stronger and stronger. And I was like, wow, it's not that I just don't want to go to that meeting. I don't even want to go back to the office. And like, I had never had that specific feeling before. Now, of course, I went back to the office. I didn't like sit out the rest of the day. I went to the quarterback meeting room and like, I didn't just go home. But that was the first time that I kind of had a pull in another direction. And without getting too much deeper into it, because I could tell a 20-minute story right now, but basically I'm working at UCLA, one of the top institutions in the world in terms of college athletics. I'm living in Santa Monica, one of the nicest places to live, definitely in the United States. And I wasn't happy and I wasn't fulfilled. And I think like as that feeling grew from that one day, that meeting I didn't want to go into, I think it was just like this realization of, at what point do I become happy? I'm looking around at all these older coaches than me, and they're, early to mid to late 50s, and they're all divorced and they all have weird relationships with their kids. And they've been on this path for 30 plus years where they've moved every 2 to 3 years, and their families have had to move as a consequence of that. And yeah, some of these guys make a ton of money. So a lot of these guys, I would say names, and football fans would know who they are, but like at what cost? And so I'm not saying that's for all coaches in like stereotyping them, but that is a very common trait, is this constant movement, this, almost kind of like foregoing everything else in your life to pursue this professional goal. And I just didn't feel like I wanted to do it anymore. So I'm giving you kind of a long-winded answer, and there's probably a couple more layers to it than that. But I think ultimately, and I encourage this, I end up talking to a lot of people that are in transition, whether it's people transitioning from college to the pros, or people that are transitioning out of their pro or college careers and like entering into real life, and or a lot of people that are kind of reclaiming another career. And I tell them to like, really, my advice would be to kind of really listen to yourself when things like that happen. I was at a point in time where I had the luxury to kind of take a step back and pivot, so to speak. And so if you have that type of luxury, I think that's really important. And I didn't want to have a like very, very profound moment like that, like I was having at the end of my last season in football, and just kind of like continue going on the path. I just really felt like I can do a lot of things with the same skill set I have that I've learned within football and translate that outside of football. And I don't want to live this life anymore. It was a lot of things kind of pulling at me at once, but I think the biggest thing was just listening to like what my mind and my body was telling me, because I had never experienced that before. And I kind of had a feeling that it was probably something a little more profound than just being a little upset or frustrated.
Right. And when I first came in the military, my first platoon sergeant told us all, "You'll know when it's time to get out of the military. You'll feel it. You'll know when it's time to go." And when a year out from my retirement, I knew it was time. I said, "It's it. It's time. I'm done. I'm in a young man's game. It's time to come out, and it's time to go find an adult job, I guess." And I put my retirement paperwork in, and I got out. So I understand what you're saying about the not having that whole feeling to stay there no more, and knowing when it's time to switch or pivot, like you said, and move to something new, into a new transition in life. And it's great that you were able to recognize it, and before you became a totally miserable person.
Yeah, and I think that's like one of the tough things too, right? Like, had I been, I tell people a lot of times, like, oh, had I been at Iowa State in Ames, Iowa, maybe it's a little different, right? Maybe, because even when I was at UCLA, I worked with two of the best quarterbacks in college in the last 20 years of college football. And like they had a ton of success when I was there. And so it's just kind of like, had I not been in LA, or specifically Santa Monica, and like looking at quote unquote life all around me that I wasn't getting to take in, I might have had a different feeling. But as you mentioned, I think that any time in life you have something profound like that, and you kind of adequately described it right there. Like when you know, and I'm sure throughout your entire military career, it was just kind of like what you did. But the moment you started thinking about something else, you were like, ooh, okay, like haven't ever thought about this before. And, let me kind of listen to this little pull that I'm getting within my
And it was definitely advice
self.
I kept in my pocket for 20 years, so it was good. I kept my toolbox, like you took notes all the time. I kept it in my pocket for 20 years. His advice, and I had it always. I said, he told me I'll know what it feels like when I want to leave, and I took it and I left. So that's great. And now you've written a book and you have a podcast. So tell us a little bit about finding intangibles.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share. The book is Finding Intangibles, and the idea really started early in my coaching career. I saw that a lot of coaches focused almost primarily in the recruiting process, especially during the talent evaluation. And like, don't get me wrong, talent is a big piece of like determining who can really succeed in college football. But I always felt like there were other factors at play. We talked about it at the very, very front end of our conversation, the work ethic, the type of passion and importance that what you do has in your life, being a great teammate. I think all of these are very, very important. And I think that teams go wrong when they don't prioritize character and they focus solely on talent. So I started to see this throughout my career, is that the really great performers and the really, really good teams, they're not good because they have the most talent. They're good. They are great because they have the most character. And from Tom Brady to like, any championship team you name me, like we could sit here and talk about how they weren't the most talented team, but yet they had this ability to overcome these random events and setbacks that happen during the course of any season. And that's really where it came from, was seeing that not everybody does this. Not everybody looks at the talent. They don't look at the character or prioritize it very highly. And that's what all of the best teams and best players were doing. And that's what they had. And so that's what this book is about, is really about, what are the character traits that really drive high performance, particularly in football. But I use a lot of examples from business and, other sports. And you see it across, across different boundaries. And so really just something that I've always been passionate about my whole career. career, I wrote my master's thesis on talent acquisition in college athletics. And so this is kind of building upon that master's thesis. And, again, just kind of like wanting to know more about what are the traits that drive peak performance in teams and performers, and then how do you find them? And so this book is really about, how do you build a high performing team and get the culture ultimately that you want. And what I see a lot of times, especially in corporate America, like the people I work with, they don't always tie their vision for the culture that they want to the talent acquisition process. And that's vital. You can't say, for football teams, you can't say like, oh, we really want like a smart, tough football team, but then not specifically go out and find tough, smart football players. I think in my career, I saw a lot where coaches would like point at the wall and say, guys, we're a tough team. And tough teams are not told that they're tough and become tough. Tough teams are built with tough players. So, regardless of whether you're looking for a certain mindset, a certain intelligence, a certain passion, great teammates, you just have to understand what it is you're looking for and then make sure you're finding that in the people that you're building your team with.
That's great advice right there. Yeah.
So that is my book, and I apologize. I obviously am super passionate about this. I could really get fired up and get going. And you also mentioned my podcast, and I view my podcast very much in the same realm. The podcast is called The Highest Level, and it's really about what does leadership excellence look like at the highest levels of sport, and what does it take to build a championship team and a championship culture. And so I interview athletes, sports leaders, coaches, team executives on that podcast, really just to kind of hear their stories, hear their experiences, and learn from them about leadership excellence and championship cultures.
Outstanding. And you brought up character, vice, athleticism, and you also brought up Cole Beasley earlier. He's a person that was said, oh, he's undersized, he's never going to make it, he'll never do it. And then he wreaked havoc on my team forever when he was on the Cowboys. I hated him. I hated his name. And I seen him get on the field. He's going to catch like 7 balls right now. And he would find a way. He'd get open across the middle as a little dude running across the middle. He had that work ethic to do it. And he's obviously still going because he was that good in his mind. His mind told him he can do it. He did it. And he pushed himself. And I think that's a perfect example of what your book is showing right there.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people misinterpret or don't understand what it takes to be successful. And you mentioned Cole Beasley, and it's like a lot of people look at the NFL and you think, well, you have to be 6 feet tall. You have to run a 4.40. You have to have this, and this. And it's all talent-based and it's all measurables. But if you talk to anybody, what does it take to be successful? Well, the reason why Cooper Kupp wasn't a first-round draft pick, and there's a myriad of reasons, but he ran a 4.6 40. Well, I talk in my book about ignoring the unimportance. And the unimportance are, Cole Beasley being 5'8", or Cooper Kupp being, 4.66 40 time. It's like, a 40 time doesn't actually translate to the field. Like what really matters is like, can you get open? Can you separate from your defender? Two things that Cooper Kupp and Cole Beasley are probably the best in the NFL at, but people look at them and discount them for all these other reasons, but they don't actually take into account the things that actually lead to success. So yes, you have to have like those certain physical traits. And a lot of teams don't quite understand that. They get enamored with the combine and the certain measurables. And as you were kind of alluding to, like that's not what drives these guys to be the very best at what they do, despite their physical limitations. It's all of these other things that really make them great.
Exactly. And where can our audience pick up your book?
Yeah. So my book is available on Amazon. And that is the best place to find my book and get it. And, if there was an interest in bulk orders, you could email me directly and I could set that up for you. But Amazon is typically the best place to find my book.
Awesome. So Finding Intangibles by Evan Burk on Amazon. So make sure you search that and pick it up for them. And how can someone get you to come speak at their event or speak to your corporation to pump them up and get their leadership going?
Yeah, certainly. And I talk on all things peak performance, leadership, team building, and winning cultures. And you can find me on my website and information about my speaking. And that website is Coach Evan Burk. Burk is spelled B-U-R-K, coachevanburk.com. And you can find me on social media at Coach Evan Burk. And I'm at Coach Evan Burk on every social media channel. So those are the two best places to reach out to me. And there's contact information on my website as well.
Awesome. Evan, thanks for taking some of your time this evening to hang out with us and teach the Misfit Nation tips and tricks on how to be successful at the highest level.
Yeah, this was great, Rich. Thank you again so much for having me and let me come on and share with your audience.
Awesome. No problem.